My name is Lillian Alvarez. I'm originally from the land now known as Guatemala. My family and I emigrated in the early 90s. And I've had the privilege to work in immigration and resettlement work probably for the last decade or so. I am now the co-director of a small organization we started back about almost 3 years ago now. It's called Home is Here NOLA, and we work to create systems of support and really try to work on bridging our ally community members and our directly impacted folks, which is what brings me to this presentation today. Is we were awarded through a fund to foster belonging, and we started a program or a project called the Detention Visitation Program in New Orleans, I would say March of last year. So originally it was called the Liberation Visitation Project, but through conversations with directly impacted folks, they wanted to name it the Detention Visitation Project and be more intentional about what it was. And it was designed really to bring individuals who identified as immigrants alongside with folks that did not, or that were what they called allies. They called themselves allies, or immigrant community members called them allies. And what it was a commitment to be in relationship together for abolition and anti-detention work in not only in our region, but throughout our state. And so the idea was that participants would have a wide range of lived experiences and exposure to immigration and or incarceration, also with a lens of like mutual aid and solidarity. So our goals for this project was really to provide like a fundamental like training and understanding specifically on these systems, the system of incarceration and immigration. Both are complex, but they both directly and indirectly impact all of us. And so with that in mind, we also reviewed the injustices that are happening within the justice system and reviewed what anti-Blackness and white supremacy, how it shows up in those systems in order to then build those bridges and understand like the impacts of working alongside with people that have been directly impacted and people that are allies. So we gathered some data on the movement and basically like people's sense of belonging and people's sense of how they were able to show up in this work. And what went well was people who were directly impacted are actually now themselves involved in the detention visitation program, which is really powerful to witness and like huge. Knowing that someone was incarcerated in a detention center in Louisiana and seeing how they themselves are now empowered to go back to that same center and visit people and empower people within as well is like, yeah, it's powerful to witness. And so they themselves are now providing training, so they're taking the leadership development that is happening with the immigrant community is beautiful to witness. And so they are using their own voice and taking the lead in, again, like I mentioned, co-designing what these trainings look like. And then they're also bridging other people that are impacted by other systems. So we call that like intersection. And in this work of intersection, it's also beautiful to witness how people are themselves showing up. People that are marginalized by other systems are now showing up to work with our immigrant community members because they understand that like the duality of the layered marginalization affects us all, right? And so yeah, I think that one of the things that surprised us is that when we call people allies, you know, I had an assumption and I had a bias of who I thought an ally was. And when we looked at people's self-identifiers, we surveyed them to prior to kind of coming along in our trainings and prior to enrolling in like the project. And people identified, yeah, that were directly impacted folks, either they themselves were incarcerated or they had a family member who was. It was almost a quarter, which is huge. And then we were surprised to see that 1/3 of folks were Latine, 1/3 were Afro or Black, and then 1/3 of folks were white. And so I think that there's a lot of assumptions that allies look a certain way or are from a certain age group, and like we were surprised to find out that actually it's like a 33-year-old is the average. Most identify as LGBTQIA plus, and yeah, they span from like 23-year-olds to 76-year-olds. So it was just like a really beautiful thing to witness and to be a part of, and a thing to debunk, because as I mentioned, people that were previously also marginalized by other systems were now a part of supporting and being a part of this project, which was also like, yeah, it was just amazing for us. And then, yeah, kind of even split on working class and middle class. So additionally, what surprised us was how much people had alignment and the momentum that was created. People felt like they were welcome. People felt like they could contribute. They were emotionally connected to the group, and they felt like they belonged, which was huge. Like, I think for us, knowing that there is like safety created within this very unsafe and very dark world, just like felt really, it felt powerful to just be able to provide those spaces for folks. Yeah, and I think that some of the things that we encountered were some obstacles, were just like really just systemic issues that I think are probably across the board for a lot of folks. Things that they face are like language access, time constraints, and then also, the detention centers here in Louisiana, they are in very, very rural areas. And so it takes 3 or 4 hours to get to one of the detention centers just to visit a few folks. And so it's a whole day that we ask of our volunteers, of our allies, to spend on the road, really, and then in community with people. And so I think that is one barrier. I don't foresee that we'll be able to overcome that. But it is just something to keep in mind for us when we're doing these projects and like the ask of people. And then I think just logistically, I think, scheduling people, the detention centers have really restrictive like hours for visitation. And so sometimes it doesn't call for going to visit, but it calls for like writing a letter. And so like that's also another part that we've expanded more, and to meet people where they're at, because I think that there are different layers of relationships that people can have with others. And so yeah, and I think that in being intentional about how we move through this work, I think that it's real. As I mentioned before, working with allies, there are perceptions that perhaps people have that allies have their own space, and directly impacted people have another role to play. And like, while that's true, they can definitely work together, and we can bridge those two worlds. And I think that it doesn't have to be just two worlds, but we can bridge those. We can bridge allies and folks that are directly impacted by one. I think co-designing again with directly impacted folks. I think that centering them and then providing like the roles that folks can play in support. I think that that's kind of how we really modeled this project. And so, I think first and foremost, we didn't just randomly visit people in detention. We went and communicated either with their attorney or with them through a letter about getting consent to go visit them. So like, if a person did not want to be visited and just wanted to be a pen pal, great. But if people did want to get a visit, then we would document that and then like have that person as like a next on the list to visit. With that in mind as well, I think that we developed some language access protocols, because not everyone spoke well, not even everyone spoke Spanish. We had a lot of like Wolof, French, Portuguese speakers that we were communicating with. Yeah, and I think what we would do different, again, I think extend the visits. It's a lot to ask for someone to go up 4 hours and come back 5 hours. So we're looking for overnight spaces. And then, yeah, having more consistent orientation and education. In all honesty, I think that there's so much that happens in immigration. There's so much that happens in these systems that we are privy to that potentially we don't do the best of communicating to other folks about. And so I think that that also like goes hand in hand with being more visible with our project. And I think that being a part of we're part of a coalition that is now kind of like gaining their momentum here in Louisiana. And so I'm hoping that with the momentum of the coalition and this project, we will be able to be more visible about this work. We did get some additional funding from the Detention Watch Network to continue this project. And so, again, I think that involving more members of not only our coalition, which also has like partners and individuals, but I think that continuing to, again, center people that were directly impacted, call folks in, and then also continuing to call other folks, our youth. They're very powerful. I think that we haven't thus far done a great job of calling in our university students or even like late high school students into this movement, but that is potentially on the horizon. Youth have a lot of energy and a lot of resources that we know that can also be impactful into shaping how this project plays out. So thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm grateful for the Welcoming America and for the Fund to Foster Belonging. And if y'all have questions or want to get in touch, please email us at detention@homeisherenola.org. And our website is also homeisherenola.org.